This is the second episode in a two-part series, and the second story in a larger season. This season covers cases in New Mexico. All season, we're supporting the New Mexico nonprofit, Angels Voices Silence No More. Please, be sure to listen through the end of the episode for more information. This series discusses alleged intimate partner violence. If you're in need of resources, please reach out to 800-799-SAFE or thehotline.org. This is The Fall Line. Last time, we brought you the story of Melissa Ann Montoya, who grew up in Dulce, New Mexico. It's a town in the north-central part of the state, located on the reservation of the Jicarilla Apache Nation. According to the 10 Tribes Partnership, the Jicarilla Apache Nation Reservation, quote, ranges from high desert at the south boundary to mountainous areas reaching over 11,400 feet in elevation in the north. That northern boundary meets Colorado. And in the last few years, before she disappeared, Melissa Montoya was living there, 30 minutes over the state line, and farther from friends and family than she ever had been. According to her cousin, Melissa Gomez, and family friend Darlene Gomez, who also shared an aunt with Melissa, Melissa was resourceful and kind. They described her to us as tough, someone who handled ranch work easily, and was self-sufficient and strong-willed. She'd grown up in a family of 7 children, and was outgoing and resourceful. Darlene said Melissa was the kind of person you could, quote, always count on to help you, and to stand up for what was right. And it's no surprise that she looked up to Melissa when she was growing up. Melissa was an adult when her cousin Melody was born, but they'd become friendly when Melody was 19 or 20, and Melissa was in her early 40s. By that time, Darlene was away at law school in Albuquerque. She wasn't there to witness the events surrounding Melissa's disappearance. When Melissa moved to that home, just over the Colorado border, she'd gone with her boyfriend, and Melody described that situation as isolated and isolating. She told us her family was concerned for Melissa, and that she personally witnessed controlling behavior on the part of Melissa's partner. Numerous news outlets have reported that Melissa was in an abusive relationship in the time preceding her disappearance, and that she'd left that relationship in the spring of 2001. Per NBC, the Jicarilla Apache Nation Police Department, quote, was aware of the issues between Melissa and her boyfriend. Melody told us that in March of 2001, Melissa was back in Dulce and feeling hopeful about the future. On St. Patrick's Day, she attended an event at the Apache House of Liquor, a local bar, where she was seen by numerous witnesses, including Melody herself. Witnesses said that her former boyfriend was there that night too. And, as we told you last time, there were reports of tension between the two that night. Several people said that when Melissa left, he followed soon after. That was the last time that anyone saw Melissa Montoya. But her family didn't know that she was missing. Not right away. Remember, this was 2001. People were not in constant contact, and Melissa had been back and forth between Colorado and New Mexico. But when one of her aunts didn't see her in Dulce for a month or two, she'd always stop and visit when she came into town to pick up her per capita check. She sent out an alarm to the rest of the family. And when they searched and couldn't find her, they called local authorities. That, Melody told us, is when some of the difficulties began.
There was difficulties initially because she was a member of the Jicarilla Apache Nation, and those types of crimes fall under the FBI. The New Mexico State Police would investigate the local jurisdiction outside of the reservation. However, she resided in Archuleta County, which was in Colorado. So there was 3 different jurisdictions that were, I don't know what the working relationship between the 3 was, but it seemed to be like, oh, the state police are working on it, or no, Colorado's working on it, or because she's an enrolled member of the Jicarilla Apache Nation, the nation is handling it. So we got a lot of that, but the only true communication I think that my parents had were from the New Mexico State Police.
Darlene was in law school when Melissa disappeared, and as we told you last episode, her mother called to give her the news. Melissa's family was there with her mother, and she recalled they had legal questions and some inquiries about how to best deal with the jurisdictional issues that they were facing. Darlene recalled to us that she reached out to a Dulce local, a New Mexico state police officer named Gabe Valdez, to see if he could improve communication. As she told the Tri-City Record, quote, Valdez knew everyone in Dulce and the surrounding area, including the Colorado communities on the other side of the state line. To the best of his ability, Valdez tried to work with Colorado law enforcement to solve the case. Darlene said that they appreciated his help. She felt like because he knew both law enforcement agencies beyond Dulce and the community, he might open those lines of communication.
You know, my parents owned a 7-Eleven, so there was always free coffee and free pastries for Officer Valdez. So I got to have, a lot of relationships with the people who came into our store. And I think that's why it's so important for, even now to have some type of community policing in the realm that the FBI or state police officers live in the community and get to know the community and have their kids go to school with the kids in the community. He really made a positive impact in our community.
We were denied FOIA fulfillment in Melissa's case based on the open nature of the investigation, so we cannot trace the precise trails of which agency operated when. But the Jicarilla Apache Nation Police are now the primary investigative agency in her disappearance. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is also a contact agency in her case. We reached out to the Jicarilla Apache Nation Police Department for comment, but as of the time of this episode's airing, we have not received a response. Representatives of Jicarilla PD did speak with NBC, though, and they said they'd begun investigating Melissa's disappearance, quote, about a month after she went missing. They confirmed they'd spoken to her ex-boyfriend, who denied leaving the bar with her or directly after her. In fact, he did not admit that, quote, they'd been together at the bar either. In their conversation with NBC, Jicarilla PD representatives also confirmed the participation of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, whose agents apparently participated by doing an interview and surveying a person they described as, quote, the individual we believe was involved with her disappearance. They also confirmed that there was not a ground search for Melissa, but that, quote, they did look at the Colorado property. Then a Jicarilla PD representative said, quote, and then they kind of just fizzled out from there. There would not be another chance for any agency to speak with Melissa's former boyfriend. According to KOA-TV, he died within months of her disappearance, allegedly as a result of suicide. And then, the home that he and Melissa had shared in Colorado, quote, was set on fire a few days later. Melody told KOA-TV that, quote, I saw the flames. When I was getting closer, I rolled down the windows to try and see more, and the heat was so extensive that you couldn't even really roll down your window. So, there would be no chance of searching that property again either. After the fire, there were no clear leads to follow in Melissa's case, and there was very little that her loved ones could do to get her in front of a national audience. Social media, which has helped to highlight missing people who don't make the mainstream news, it was still years away, and the NamUs database had not yet been established. It wouldn't be up and running in a publicly usable form for another 7 years. And when it finally was, there were still more hurdles for Darlene and for Melissa's family. By that point, Darlene was practicing law and had begun advocating for families in New Mexico. She realized the potential power of NamUs, both as a tool for law enforcement and as a database that the public could use to assist with cases. But there was an immediate issue with Melissa's entry. When her page was established in 2010, there was no photo of Melissa included. We've talked before about how important forensic art, good forensic art, can be for an unidentified person because it helps connect their case to potential matches for missing people. It's just as vital, even more vital, that missing people's profiles have clear photographs available. In Melissa's case, her family feared that she'd been killed, but they could not be certain. And if she was a match for a Jane Doe out there, a photo that was a match for a forensic reconstruction could trigger a process that could lead to DNA comparison. We have to remember, Just because a John or Jane Doe is listed in the system or on a law enforcement website or has a mention of DNA available in their profile, it doesn't necessarily mean that the DNA has actually been extracted or entered into CODIS or a database that allows for genealogical research. The late Todd Matthews, who founded the Doe Network and helped to get NamUs up and running, explained that on this very podcast. He told us that in some cases, it can simply mean that material is available for DNA testing, should that testing be necessary. Say a blood card exists on file, or that law enforcement has retained evidence, or knows that remains can be sampled. That's not the usual situation, but it's not unheard of. And when DNA is on file, it's not continually being run against every single other case in some endless search for matches. Comparisons have to be sought. A photo for Melissa could be such a trigger. Darlene explained to us how that, a photo for Melissa, was a priority in her advocacy in the case.
I had been trying to get her picture on NamUs for many, many years, like 5 or 6 years, where I would call it in and say, like, here's the picture, and then would try to upload it and, try to let the police know, like, here's her picture, can you add it? That's where I had the most problems. But when the FBI decided to put their missing persons flyers or missing persons list, I did reach out to the FBI and they put her in the system fairly quickly, but you have to remember that they have to get permission from all the other people involved, the other police agencies. But then, it's interesting because with NamUs, only until about, I would say, 3 weeks ago, did her picture actually show up in NamUs. So she had been faceless, a silhouette for, 23 years. I think at times I would just cry because I couldn't do anything to help her. So I felt like my hands were tied. And even though I have a Juris Doctorate and I know my way around the laws of the federal government, tribal government, I just wasn't getting anywhere. So it was just really, really frustrating. And then to tell people about it, and they're like, they can't believe, nobody can believe it, but it's true. That's really hard too, because if it was someone else from another white family, it wouldn't take 23 years.
In our experience, the process for uploading a photo to NamUs, and we cannot verify it has always been this way, is as follows. Law enforcement or a medico-legal professional, such as a medical examiner, uploads the file, and then it must be reviewed and approved on the NamUs side before it appears to the public. But sometimes, getting various agencies to make use of NamUs and to keep it updated can be an uphill battle. It's an issue that we've discussed on this podcast many times before. NamUs now has a tribal liaison, Cornelia Perry, who, per their website, joined the organization in 2021. Quote, after a long and successful career as a criminal investigator, early on, she was the only NamUs user in the Navajo Nation, so she took it upon herself to dive in and start working on cases. Perry got the entire backlog in her district entered into the system. Then, per NamUs, she began traveling across other districts to do the same, and to recruit other law enforcement to enter cases as well. NamUs explains that, quote, as NamUs tribal liaison, her role includes traveling to tribal agencies and working with them to register NamUs. This brings the program's free resources to investigate missing and unidentified persons cases to U.S. tribes and sovereign nations. Since she began her work, there's been, quote, a 20% increase in tribal case entries. That is a major step forward for cases that have been historically underreported in the system. Regarding NamUs, there's also a separate, quote, Support for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Person Cases initiative, which involves large-scale support for everything from, quote, free database technology, forensic services, and investigative support to expansion in categories of cases listed on NamUs and monthly data updates on MMIP cases that are publicly accessible. But agencies still have to provide some material, like Melissa's photo, or it simply won't appear. Darlene's glad that Melissa's photo is there now, but she believes that it should have been up a long time ago. As best as we've been able to tell, her photo was only uploaded this year. It was also recently added to the FBI page on her case. In 2020, there was a possible development in Melissa's case. According to KOA-TV, Darlene was contacted by a member of the public who'd been searching NamUs and came upon a Jane Doe. She hadn't been looking for a match for Melissa. Rather, she was searching for her own missing loved one. But when she found an unidentified set of remains in the Dulce area on the database, she decided to search for missing persons who might fit the profile. Darlene told KOA-TV, quote, "I received an email from a woman who was looking for her loved one who went missing from California. So she came across the NamUs record stating that bones and a skull had been found in Dulce, New Mexico, and they were a female that was between 30 and 60 years of age and Native American. And so she did her own research, and she found that there were only 3 women missing from the area, and Melissa Montoya was one of them." Darlene said that when she reached out to the New Mexico OMI, she was initially told that there were no funds available to do DNA testing on the remains. Then, Darlene got in contact with the Jicarilla Apache Nation Police Department, who told her that they would begin to pursue DNA testing. The first step would be to look at extracting and sequencing DNA from the unidentified victim. Then, they'd need to compare that to samples from Melissa's mother and sister. In a second KOA-TV article, Darlene told reporters that the OMI's office said that they were now, quote, looking into a possible match for Melissa. So, both agencies were on board. This process, though, can take a long time. If they pursued testing through the FBI or NamUs, that can often be the case. There's a huge backlog because of lack of nationwide departmental funding. And Darlene told us that that wait was hard.
Correct. It's so hard, even waiting to see if these remains that were found were Melissa's. I've broken down I don't think I slept for 5 or 6 weeks, just not knowing what was going on. And the fact that I just had to jump through so many hoops. It was like hoop after hoop after hoop. And having to call and, get the media involved to finally see some movement. It just really tore me down emotionally, physically, and also just trying to control that part of me that wanted to know why things were like this for 23 years, but then also remembering, my mom has a saying in Spanish, it's "Ya pa qué," why now? What is it going to change it? And trying to be okay, I can't be angry about 23 years because it's not going to change anything. So what can I do to move things forward to make sure there's policies in place that this doesn't happen to another family?
Just before we conducted our formal interview, Darlene told us that she'd gotten unofficial word that the results were coming soon, but that the unidentified victim was unlikely to be Melissa. And on July 31st, 2024, NBC reported that official news Darlene had been waiting for. The remains found near Dulce had been ruled out as being those of Melissa Montoya via STR testing. The individual had been identified as a male, though his identity is still unknown. Regarding that discrepancy, NBC notes, per officials, that the victim's remains were, quote, tested in 2020, and those original results had come back as female. They explained that the 2024 results showed the decedent was male. Based on what Darlene understood, in her discussion with law enforcement, the original test referred to in the NBC article was likely a skeletal analysis performed by a scientist and not a DNA test. The 2024 DNA test would have shown XX or XY markers, thus giving them the result of male or female.
They said initially when they did some kind of test through the anthropologist that that's where they got the Native American female between 30 to 60. And they said now that they were actually able to use some DNA to test it against the remains. And we're told that there was a male chromosome, so it automatically excluded Melissa.
Darlene had been hopeful that she'd finally found answers for Melissa's family and for everyone else in the community who'd been waiting. Darlene told us that her own mother had asked about Melissa until the day she passed away. Darlene had not been able to give her an answer. This time, she felt like she'd been so close. More than ever, Darlene feels driven to push for change at all levels. The power to get phone calls returned, the ability to coordinate resources, to connect departments and forensic testing more effectively, and to most effectively advocate for the missing, the murdered, the unidentified, and their families. She's someone who works within the system as a lawyer, but she sees the gaps in it, up close, every day.
You are in such a unique position. You are seeing it and coming at it from different angles. On one hand, you are a family member, a friend, reaching out, waiting for someone to help you. And on the other hand, you have some power in directing the future of policy.
Most definitely. And I think, gosh, what about all the other families that don't have a Darlene in their life? Because, I am considered one of the leading experts in MMIWR, and this is all the roadblocks I'm facing. Could you imagine just a normal family? And I can also say, looking back on the 23 years, when I first started helping the family, I was like, yes, just, get with law enforcement and give them the information. And then 23 years later, to know that law enforcement really didn't do a lot with the information that was given to them, like very few reports. There's hardly anything on her case. And so now my advice to families is to make sure you make 2 copies of everything you give the police. Make sure you call every 3 months. Make sure you're contacting the media and keeping her story out there. Hold the police accountable and just keep working social media. So you think about 23 years ago, there really wasn't social media. So 23 years ago, like my whole thing was like, oh, trust the police will help you. And then we were lucky too. We had a retired state police officer who actually tried to come back and just assist in trying to get a police department to take jurisdiction and try to move things along. And so that was just based on the fact that he grew up in that community as a state police officer and knew the family and knew Melissa. The last time Melissa was seen was on March 9th of 2001. And so it was interesting because she came into town every month for sure. And that was on the day that she would receive her per capita. So the Jicarilla Apache Nation is a tribe that is very rich in oil and gas. So each individual member would get a royalty check. So Melissa didn't pick up her royalty check for 2 months. The family had, tried to report her missing, but it wasn't until May that the BIA assigned a detective to it. And then on June 1st of 2001, her boyfriend ended up dead. So there was no reports. The Archuleta County Sheriff's Department said that they shredded the file.
Darlene thinks that a DNA sample on file for Melissa's case was put into the databases around 2014. She told us that, overall, she's still concerned that there were so few things done between 2001 and that time. She also says that the original police report has been lost. But, she says, there has been a new investigator assigned to Melissa's case.
So I can say now the new criminal investigator on this case, he's been trying to piece together everything he can find, which has been hard. So I appreciate his efforts in trying to connect the dots.
Darlene's advocacy has been a major part of connecting those dots too, not just in Melissa's case, but in more than a dozen others. Just in the weeks that we've known her, she's been on the receiving end of so many files and emails and correspondence, always copied when family members are, so she gets each piece of information that they do. It's part of her work, she says. Courtrooms, legislation, phone calls, documentation, rallying media, and chasing down leads. Darlene does all of it. Facing so many unresolved cold cases to go to battle for, Darlene says that she is often asked how she handles it all.
People ask me this question often, but I think that God, the creator, gave me this ability to work these cases and to kind of put them in compartments. Very recently, though, I really feel like it's so hard because when you do everything for a family and try to find justice for them or find the bodies, like at some point you run into that dead end. And then it's you feel like you failed somewhere. So sometimes I feel like, oh man, I failed is there something else I could do? But then I think also it's hard, like on families, because I've been successful in probably solving about 6 cases, which is really high in Indian country. So I think it can be hard for some families to see that other families are getting closure. And so, the way I work my cases is cases that are closer in age to where we are today. So the cold cases are super hard to work. And then, cases where there's a body found, those are cases that get some priority. And then when we get momentum, like we did on the Pepita Red Hair case and LMA Begay, Jamie Ozzie. So that's kind of how I prioritize if there's an avenue that I can get some media on. But, I'm really tired now. Like I need a break for a couple of months because on any given day, I can spend hours on MMIWR cases. And so it's like trying to keep my private practice afloat and going. I also have a 12-year-old who requires a lot of time now because he plays competitive baseball and he goes to a private school where I really have to devote a lot of time to his education. I think one of the other things also is the fact that, I was engaged for the past 4 years and I'm no longer engaged due to the amount of time that I spend on MMIW cases. So it's very taxing. Like when I look back, I've easily done 2.3 million in pro bono work and have put out over $50,000 out of pocket, not to mention the revenue that I've lost in my private law practice doing so much MMIW. But I really felt like when you get those momentums going in cases, that you just can't stop. So like in the Jamie Ozzie case, this is going on 5 years. And her perpetrator is just now getting sentenced.
According to Fox 10, Jamie Ozzie, a 32-year-old mother, quote, went missing in the summer of 2019. Despite, quote, a high-profile search, her remains were not found until November 2021 on the neighboring Hopi Reservation in northeastern Arizona. In 2023, Trey C. James was convicted in both the domestic abuse of and murder of Jamie.
The hard part, too, is when you're doing it, you don't realize how much time is because you're just doing it. You're like, I got to do this. I got to do this. And then another door opens. And my family always says, when there's an opportunity, you have to seize that opportunity because it may not be there again. It's really interesting because I think my community is like, oh, that's Darlene. Like, she just does it. I don't get a lot of like thank yous from that community. But when I meet other people, they're like, oh my God, that's amazing. So I guess I've never thought of it as being amazing or being out of the ordinary. So I'm trying to learn how to accept the things that I've been able to do for MMIW, and because I always try to be humble about it, because we all have roles. And my son will say, oh, that's my mom's talent. And God, gives us talent so we could use it to help other people. And so I really feel like that. It sounds corny, but I think this has been my path. And with Melissa, that journey started actually before Melissa in like 2000. I was an intern at the district attorney's office in Farmington, New Mexico. And my first MMIW case was there. It was Betty Lee, who was killed by the serial killer Robert Fry. It's been this long-term stuff because nobody would want to do MMIW to the extent that I do it, because it's very hard work. Because when you're bringing up issues and investigations, or what you perceive might be some places that need work or hold different agencies accountable, it's a very lonely place trying to do this. And then also, like, for me, accepting that I'm an activist, because I always say, oh, I'm just an advocate, I'm advocating. But then when you get labeled an activist by, like law enforcement and different agencies, I just had to learn how to accept that being an activist was a positive thing. Or when, a US attorney said I was a bulldog, I, had to go and look at the definition, because I always kind of think like, oh, well, I'm just this nice person that, says what I have to say. And I don't see myself as like a bulldog or an activist. Like, at times, do I have to be at the forefront calling out certain people? Yes. But that's just now not how I see myself.
Melissa's cousin had hoped that the DNA testing would bring her family resolution. So many of Melissa's eldest relatives are gone now. They never got the answers they'd prayed for. As Melody told The New Yorker, quote, "My mom passed away 2 years ago. She was almost 92. She had Alzheimer's. And one of the last things she kept telling me in the very last days of her life was to help find Melissa. That is one of the last memories that stayed in her brain." Now, Melody and the younger generations are the ones waiting. Melody also told us that she feels driven to speak up and out about Melissa and her case. In life, they didn't have much time together. She's connected to that past, but also the needs of today, to make sure Melissa's case doesn't fall by the wayside, to make sure she's remembered and that she is found.
I just always admired her in life because she was so beautiful and so friendly. And I think people kind of thought I have a similar personality to her. I get along well with people. And so her and I kind of gravitated to each other, even if we had such a big age difference. And we didn't spend a whole lot of time together, but the time that we did, we had like such a great time, And so I always remembered thinking, like, that can happen to anyone. What happened to her can happen to anyone. And I don't understand why more effort isn't being put in, or why aren't people making a big deal about this? Because it can happen to me, it can happen to my sisters, to my friends, it can happen to anybody, And so it always just kind of bothered me that there wasn't more effort, I guess. It's so sad, because if you travel in the rural communities, the reservation areas, there's nothing, there's no resources. And I just feel like if people paid attention to us, if we mattered, a lot of our families wouldn't be missing, murdered, Like, we matter too, we count. Now as an adult, I just feel that it's my responsibility to talk about it more and bring awareness and just say her name so that people remember that she was, a wonderful human being. And hopefully she's not ever forgotten. I'm just kind of unsure why there's such like a stigma attached to when women of color go missing. I don't understand why there's no importance placed on us. It makes me sick to think of the fact that lifestyle behaviors are attributed to people of color that go missing. It's so sad, and it hurts me every time that I watch the news and I see someone make national news that just went missing yesterday, and it's all over the news. But people won't even say the name of our missing loved ones who have been missing for years. We're made to feel like we don't matter, and that's not right. It makes me sad because I have grandkids, and we raise them to know that they're loved and they matter and that they're important and they're going to go on to be somebody so special. But I just know that not everybody grows up like that. and it's sad that if they go missing, it's almost like if they didn't even exist in the first place, We're a beautiful, beautiful people here. It feels like somebody punched you in the stomach, because it's like if there was just a fourth of that energy put forth when our sisters and brothers go missing, maybe they would have been found, or there would be some kind of justice, or just answers. A lot of times maybe justice doesn't happen, but at least if the family has answers, or if you can bring your loved one home, that's in any capacity, whether physically or to do a proper burial and give them the prayers to cross over, that matters hugely, especially in the communities that are so culturally respective, like our communities. But it's just sad to know that you belong to a demographic of people that society places very little importance on. And we are wonderful, wonderful people. We are educated, we are smart, we are loving, we have so much to offer this world. But at birth, because you're maybe a different color, or your last name is a different last name, the cards are just stacked against you immediately, And so I'm very proud to be related to Darlene, who has overcome so many of those boundaries. Darlene does a lot of advocating for the MMIW. And so I just think I can be vocal too. She does so much. The least I can do is talk about the things that I know. Because as Hispanic and Native American women, we are breaking boundaries every day. I hope that all of the pioneering that has been done by the last few generations, I hope that the younger kids feel safe and protected and valued, and want to be vocal and fight for their rights as minority people, because we just want to be treated fairly. We want to have resources. We want to live in safety, and just like our counterparts, we deserve it. We're American citizens. We deserve equal protections and equal opportunities and all of those things. But I just want people to know that her family loves her. We've never stopped. We want to find out what happened to her. We want to make sure that she has everything that she deserves. She was such a wonderful person.
At the time of Melissa Montoya's disappearance, she was 42 years old. At that time, Melissa was reported to be 5'7" and between 155 and 165 pounds. Melissa was last seen wearing brown boots and blue jeans. If you have any information regarding the disappearance of Melissa Ann Montoya, please contact the Jicarilla Apache Nation Police Department at 575-759-3222 or the Bureau of Indian Affairs Jicarilla Agency at 575-759-3951. Next time on The Fall Line, the disappearance of Calvin Willie Martinez, whose family last heard from him when he called them from a truck stop in Albuquerque in 2019. If you know of a case that should be covered on The Fall Line, there's a link to our case submission form in the show notes. Thank you for listening. This season, we're supporting Angels Voices Silence No More, a New Mexico-based nonprofit founded by our friend Eric Carter Londine, the brother of Jacob Londine. According to their mission statement, AVS&M's goal is to, quote, empower families by providing them with the necessary resources and referrals to advocate for their missing or murdered loved ones. We believe in taking a comprehensive approach to support, encompassing a wide range of services including billboards, DNA testing, private investigation, funeral expenses, therapy, and much more. Our goal is to ensure that no family faces these challenges alone. Fall Line listeners can join us in donating to that mission. If you can't donate right now, that's okay. Sharing their charitable initiatives would be a huge help. Find all the relevant links in our show notes. The Fall Line is an independent podcast, and we appreciate listener support. It allows us to do research, obtain FOIA, pay our content advisors, and support and donate to the causes we care about. If you try out the products we advertise, please use our sponsor codes. It really helps. And please take a moment to rate and review our show in your podcast app of choice. My book, Lay Them to Rest, which covers years of my life working on a Jane Doe case and the world of forensic scientists who resolve unidentified person cases, is out everywhere as hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, read by me. You can order it anywhere you get books and through your local library. Find out more through the link in our show notes. And if you'd like to support the show and the stories we cover, join us on Apple Premium or Patreon. 100% of our Patreon and Apple Premium earnings are supporting our Family Therapy Fund and actively paying for therapy for families who've appeared on the show. On Patreon, you can get early release, ad-free versions of our regular episodes for $5 a month. If you prefer Apple Premium, you can subscribe there as well. On Patreon, we also post occasional giveaways, updates, and blogs. All patrons can enjoy, starting at just $1. The Fall Line is written, hosted, and researched by Laurah Norton. Interviews by Brooke Hargrove, produced, engineered, and scored by Maura Curry. Content advisement by Brandy C. Williams and Vic Kennedy. And, as always, our most special thanks to Liz Lipka.